Let that sink in for a moment. The Integrated Bracelet Sports Watch could be seen as the biggest watch trend of all time. It's one thing when a subject has been played out, when it's run its course, when it's outstayed its welcome. But the Integrated Bracelet Sports Watch, boy, did this thing do that and then some. And to save ourselves the mental torture of hearing that phrase repeated 100 times in this video, I've abbreviated it down to either IBSWs or IBWs. The development of the IBSW began as one of scarcity and exclusivity, and it ended as one of abundance and irony. But is that the entire run of the story? Has this collection risen and fallen, never to see a rebirth or a revival? Let's find out. The integrated bracelet mania, as we once knew it, has ended. For what must be near a decade, these watches have been shoved down our throats no matter where we go in this hobby. And this unrelenting craze that seemed to grip everybody has mercifully subsided. Maybe it's just me, but I am happy that they are not polluting. That's probably too strong a word. What's a better word? Occupying. I'm so happy that these are not occupying our feeds like they once did. But I wanted to dig into the subject more because I believe that the reason for this inevitable drop-off was because of irony in the purest sense. There's a lot to cover with a video like this, and I doubt I'll be able to do it justice in the time that I've been given. But it's not clear-cut. The story of these watches had many twists and turns along the way. How these models all embodied a singular vision of reinvigorating an odd but distinctly 1970s style. They all attempted to communicate this notion of simplicity while allowing details like brushing, polishing, and chamfering to make the noise. It was this clash of elegance meets sports and the fine line that it rode. Now, some brands did achieve greatness. Some of their watches, still to this day, are some of the most sought-after watches in the world. Not only icons in their own right, but highly collectible in today's current market. And many of these models reached the heights of popularity, and the big players in the industry, they were all vying for the top spot. And at the peak of their mania, these designs, they were associated with individualism and exclusivity. So naturally, everybody wanted them, and hype and demand by the masses made them unattainable. Their skyrocketing prices on the grey market cemented them as some of the most important watches to collect. And then the floodgates opened. Lower tier brands, we could say, more affordable brands, they cottoned onto this niche and they started producing their own, flooding the market, all in an effort to capitalize off the hype that these designs had sparked. And it must be said, no matter the brand, no matter who tried to address these designs better, whenever there was this name integrated bracelet associated with them, they could jack up the prices 2.5 times more, 3 times more than their conventional pieces. You know, we could see it as a scheme, a trend, absolutely. But it was almost an insider thing between watch brands that they were all creating these watches, all trying to cross-promote, make it even more popular than it should have ever been. It was a wild time, and from personal experience, at least in the beginning, it was good fun. Many of us were spending a lot of time getting involved, looking at all of these new models, predicting what might come next, how other brands would address their own individual approaches. And here's the thing, yes, IBSWs, they catch a lot of flack, probably more than most of the other collections out there, and for good reason, I guess. But the whole revival of the 1970s style, it was interesting. From a design point of view, seeing how these brands, from entry level to top tier, how they all conjured up their own unique approaches by creating hundreds of different, similar, yes, but different results, all of which were constrained by a set of requirements. There was in fact competition between these makers, and competition always provokes amazing ideas. Some great new designs were formed thanks to the spark of creativity. And every maker was so proud of their accomplishment in this field, you know, that stamp of approval. One hand feeling like they had contributed, they'd thrown their hat into the ring, and on the other hand, they had conformed with the rest of the industry. And let's be clear, there are two camps in this field. There are some that deserve the status that they have received over time, and there are others that are merely there to copy what the others are doing. Now, so many brands are still trying to keep the integrated bracelet craze alive, probably because it has been such a strong money maker for a very long time. many of which are expanding their collections. They're making them thinner, they're offering more exclusive materials or piece-unique dials. But I do believe that the one brand that has, in a way, signaled the very end of the hype train for the IBSW, it's Rolex. 2025, they decided to announce the Land Dweller to exclamation, to yawns, to vehement protest. But haven't we also said in the past that Rolex is slow to bringing their product to market? And when they do, it's usually at a time where the trend, where the interest has simmered down to a stop. And I mean, this is a good example here. Now, on a deeper note, this could be the one thing you take away from this video. I reckon that this trend that we saw, the massive surge of output from practically every known watchmaker with all of its highs and lows, this is, and probably was, the biggest watch trend of our lifetime. Will we ever see so many brands from all different walks of life create watches, models with the same style, the same metals, the same dial color, like this again? I have my doubts. Let that sink in for a moment. The Integrated Bracelet Sports Watch could be seen as the biggest watch trend of all time. And I do think it's a very engaging thought. It's also harrowing that sort of influence, the impact that it had, shaped the way the industry is seen now. But like I've said, there are some watches here that deserve the accolades that they have been given. Maybe not so much the hype and the grey market price and the demand, but they did make a dent. So what I've decided to do is separate a collection of these pieces into two halves. One half looking at the most influential watches in this family. But then on the other side, I've also chosen a handful of pieces that I think are future classics, are ones to go after because they are very avant-garde. And they do go against a lot of what these early 1970s designs established. So the origins, I don't think many people know this, but the first watch to debut an integrated bracelet was not the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. It was in fact an Omega Constellation from 1969. The reference 168.045, it's an odd one. But the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, 1972 it arrived. It was the poster child for this trend. We could say it was the beginning of the end. Turning steel into a luxury material for the first time. Limited production run to 1,000 pieces. And if I remember right, it was very unique for its time, sure. It was more expensive than a gold watch. A very brutalist approach, celebrating that porthole design using a JLC-based caliber. Extremely thin, svelte, celebrating tapisserie, brushing and polishing. It was groundbreaking for its time, and for good reason. Now, the Patek Philippe Nautilus took another 4 years for it to arrive, I think in 1976, and this one, also created by Gerald Genta, has the similar sort of lineage. This one is what I would say is solely responsible for the hype that governs the IBSW. So these two watches by far are the most influential. These are the ones that when we close our eyes we can imagine integrated bracelets. But other notable influential watches from this time that arrived in the same sort of time frame. The IWC Ingenieur. This one was quite interesting because they decided to incorporate Faraday cage technology inside it to protect the movements. This watch was leaning more towards being a tool and a sports watch than it was anything elegant. Vacheron Constantin with the 222, my personal favorite of this family with that bottle cap bezel. The simplicity of this piece is something worth talking about. And the way that Vacheron has paid homage to this watch, as opposed to just creating a bigger one for the sake of it, keeping it very true to its roots, I think speaks volumes. The Girard-Perregaux Laureato, a very influential watch in its time, one of the earliest adopters of the integrated bracelet, nowhere near as high in popularity compared to the likes of Patek, AP, Vacheron, but it is right there and it's significant in its own way. And lastly, the Piaget Polo. With regards to being an influential piece, this one was another early adopter, very odd style and design. It looks like one that's leaning more closely to the 1980s compared to the 70s. But the reputation that these 6 watches have garnered for themselves, the most influential, and I would say they are icons in their own rights. But moving to the more avant-garde pieces that I think were birthed thanks to the rivalry and the competition that spurred on many manufacturers, these ones are very interesting. The Lange Odysseus could be seen as one such watch that is a modern classic. Now, technically not an IBSW in the purest sense of the word, because there are in fact lugs, because it does have spring bars, and it's, technically not correct. But I think the method of how this watch bucked the trend, how it's not just a simple time and date, It incorporates a complication that in typical fashion is forward-thinking and is very Lunga. Now what about the Bulgari Octo Finissimo? It's a model that leans more towards being a fashion watch and not a sports watch, but it continues to break barriers. Being one of the thinnest watches ever made, one of the thinnest sports watches, it has so many accolades to its name. It's also very unique in its style and its design. Distinctly Bulgari in the way it's been done. Brutalist, aggressive, a little bit too much for some. But another piece that was formed and shaped thanks to the competition that this trend created. Now the Vacheron Constantin Overseas. What I see about this watch is it's entirely separated from the rest of the trilogy. Where the others, Patek and AP, they played it safe. They repeated a lot of their designs, technically one for one in a lot of ways, making them bigger, making them smaller. Patek with the Cubitus, for example, not exactly groundbreaking. But the VC Overseas from day one was an interpretation of the original 222. It was their method of creating a modern spin on this property, and they did an amazing job, to a point now where this watch is seen as a go-anywhere, do-anything piece. With an integrated bracelet that is interchangeable, you can swap out to leather straps, to rubber straps, very easy on-the-fly adjustment. It's just simple enough but complex enough to be used as a sports watch, as a tool watch. And then you start getting further into it and you see dual times, titanium cases and finishes, other complications that they have adopted. I think of all of the big players, the Overseas has arrived at one of the best results, with a design that is not only timeless but has a strong eye on the future direction of where it's going to go. Now we talk about future focused. The H. Moser Streamliner is one that's always in my head. Again, the brand's identity is very strong here. We can see it belongs to H. Moser & C. But how the original debuted with that chronograph complication, with that bullhead 1970s chronograph look, lobster integrated bracelet, it looks stunning. It is one of the few watches that if I had my choice of owning any piece in the world, this would be one of them. And I think it's exactly because it goes against so many of the norms that we associate with the integrated bracelet sports watch and the 1970s look. And the last piece that I have listed here for its future potential is the Land Dweller. One of the worst names that Rolex has given to their modern collection for a very long time. But even still, I imagine this watch with a simple gloss black dial with stick baton hands, and it's going to be incredible when it finally arrives. We just know that it's going to happen, that this dial arrived to make a statement. Not necessarily to sell the watch, but to separate it from the rest of Rolex's family and their competition. Not that it isn't popular already. I don't believe anyone can get their hands on the new Land Dweller. So what is it that caused the rise and fall of the integrated bracelet sports watch? One word: novelty. In the early years, we were so driven and drawn to these watches because it was a new thing. It was different to what we were accustomed to seeing. It was exclusive, it was scarce, it was reserved for the very best brands to create. And the moment that that novelty started to wear off was when these pieces became more attainable. They became more affordable. When every brand under the sun felt they needed to repeat this exercise. It's basic principles that scarcity is what draws in demand and interest. So when the opposite happens and there is abundance, well, And the greatest irony surrounding the industry, surrounding the integrated bracelet craze, was that abundance that lied in the face of what made the original watches so sought after and in demand. And where once social media and all of these platforms, they perpetuated the nuance, the uniqueness, these fresh arrivals every week. In the same vein, when it happens for years in a row, and we don't get any time to breathe or any kind of room to separate ourselves from them, that novelty, it wears off. I, for one, really enjoyed talking about them because they were distinct and unique in their own way, but I never would consider owning them. But the greater deal breaker is that when everybody wants them, doesn't that just defeat the purpose of these watches in the first place? So we can chalk it up to many different reasons. A design that's been overly repetitive, that has outstayed its welcome. Hubris in the industry and the brands that created them. But also a genre of pieces that do have a timeless quality to them, but they're also kind of isolated from the rest of the watches that we pursue and enjoy. That, I think, in a nutshell, is the reason for the rise and the fall of the integrated bracelet sports watch, but that is not saying that there is not a chance for a rebirth or a return. I think that this quiet, after this massive storm that has rolled through, could allow us to emerge from the rubble and take another look at them from a different point of view. And even though we have been so inundated with hundreds of thousands of these things over the years, there's still that rare few that are worth going back to and looking at. Because instead of just following the herd, they have in one way or another created an identity that is unique to the brand that they represent. And those are the ones that will always remain the longest. So now that everything has simmered down, what are your thoughts on the IBSW? Do you think that a lot of what I said is just window dressing? Do you think it's necessary to give these sorts of watches the level of attention that they have? Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next one.